The landing wasn't graceful. Hell, it was barely controlled chaos. As the ship shuddered to a halt, a cacophony of metallic groans echoed through the hull. Captain Vesper Arlen braced herself against the console, her expression a mixture of relief and disdain. "Smooth as sandpaper," she muttered. Her crew, a motley assortment of spacefaring cynics and misfits, groaned collectively. "I think you broke my spine," said Thorne, the ship's mechanic. He was sprawled across the floor like a cat that lost a fight with gravity. "If you can complain, you can stand," Arlen replied, her voice as dry as the Martian desert. Thorne grunted and pulled himself up. "Next time, maybe a bit more finesse, yeah. Maybe land us on a pillow. I'll requisition one from command," Arlen said, flicking switches and shutting down systems. "But I wouldn't hold your breath." Outside, Ganymede stretched in all its bleak glory. The largest moon of Jupiter, promising more mystery than answers and more trouble than treasure, was theirs to explore. Ancient ruins loomed in the distance, dark silhouettes against the swirling chaos of Jupiter's storms. They looked about as inviting as a kick to the teeth. "All right, kids," Arlen declared, rising from her seat. "Time to earn our hazard pay." The crew assembled in the cramped cargo bay, exchanging glances that said they all wondered why they'd signed up for this. Adventure, exploration, money. A shared love of terrible food rehydrated from powder. Who could say? "Remember," Arlen said, turning to face them, "the company's paying good money for intel on those ruins. So no screwing around, no touching anything shiny, and for the love of whatever gods you don't believe in, don't breathe anything you shouldn't." "Yeah, we wouldn't want to catch a cold," said Jax, the team's sarcastic navigator, tapping the side of his helmet. "You catch a cold on Ganymede, you won't get the sniffles. You'll get an express ticket to a very cold grave," Arlen shot back. The airlock cycled open, unveiling the alien landscape. The crew stepped out, their suits sealing them from the lethal atmosphere. The surface was a wasteland of rock and ice, with the ruins jutting up like the fossilized bones of some long-dead titan. "Who built these things?" asked Mila, the team's scientist. "They sure had a flair for the dramatic. Aliens with a taste for Gothic architecture," Thorne suggested, fiddling with a scanner that beeped uselessly. "Or maybe they just really hated wide open spaces." They trudged toward the ruins, boots crunching on the icy ground. "Watch your step," Arlen warned, as if they needed reminding. It was a minefield of treacherous footing and ancient mystery. Inside, the ruins were no less foreboding. Shadows played tricks on their eyes, and every noise was amplified by the silence that had ruled here for eons. "Feels like the walls are watching us," Mila said, her voice a whisper. "They probably are," Jax said. "Or at least waiting for us to do something stupid." They moved deeper into the structure, a labyrinthine nightmare of corridors and chambers that seemed to twist and shift like a puzzle that had lost its picture. At the heart of it, they found what they'd been sent for, a chamber filled with alien technology, dormant and enigmatic. "Looks like a teenager's room," Thorne commented. "Lots of junk, nothing useful." Mila approached a console, her gloved fingers dancing over symbols that defied logic. "This tech, it's advanced, way beyond us." "Great," Arlen said, shaking her head. "So we poke it until it does something then?" "That's the plan," Mila replied with a grim smile. As she tapped a final sequence, the room thrummed to life. Lights flickered on in a cascading wave and the air tingled with energy. The crew watched in awe, a mix of wonder and apprehension. "Congratulations," Jax said. "You've turned on the alien disco lights." "More like the world's worst alarm clock," Thorne added. The ground trembled, a subtle shift that sent shivers up their spines. Arlen's gaze darted around. "Everyone stay sharp." But it was too late, the damage was done. Mila was examining a panel when it happened. The air seemed to ripple and a hissing sound filled the chamber. "What's that?" she asked, glancing around. "Atmosphere's changing," Thorne said, "and not in a good way." "We've activated something," Arlen said, her tone laced with a mixture of excitement and dread. "Yeah," Jax said, looking at the alien symbols now glowing menacingly. And whatever it is, I don't think it likes us. A whirring noise grew louder, like a machine waking from a long slumber. The walls seemed to pulse with energy and the floor vibrated beneath their boots. "Time to move," Arlen ordered. They retraced their steps, the ruins now a hostile maze intent on keeping them. The air grew thick, and breathing became a laborious task even through their suits. "Not to state the obvious," Thorn gasped, "but I think we've overstepped a boundary." "No kidding," Mila replied, her face pale behind the visor. "Let's get back to the ship," Arlen urged, her voice cutting through the growing panic. "We need to warn command." They stumbled out into the harsh light of Ganymede, and the sight that met them was nothing short of apocalyptic. The landscape was changing, the ground shifting and cracking as if the moon itself was rebelling against their intrusion. "Terraforming," Mila said, awe and terror mingling in her voice. "The bacteria, it's transforming the moon." "And we're standing in ground zero," Thorn observed bleakly. "Great," Jax muttered. "I always wanted to be part of a science experiment." Arlen led them back to the ship, urgency in her every step. "Come on, we need to get off this rock before it turns us into fertilizer." They boarded the ship, sealing themselves away from the chaos outside. But as Arlen began the launch sequence, an alert blared across the control panel. "What's wrong now?" Thorn asked, exasperation dripping from his words. "The bacteria," Mila said, staring at the readouts. "It's gotten in." "Into the ship?" Jax asked, incredulous. "Into us," she replied, her voice a death knell. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. Arlen's mind raced. "So what now?" she asked, her tone belying the fear that gnawed at her insides. "Now," Thorn said, his usual sarcasm replaced by grim determination, "we find a way to stop this before we end up remaking the solar system in our image." "Oh, good," Jax said, leaning back in his seat. "I was worried we wouldn't have a purpose in life." The ship's engines roared to life, lifting them from the doomed surface of Ganymede. As they rose, the scale of the transformation became apparent. The moon was alive, changing, evolving thanks to them. "What are the odds?" Thorn said, peering out at the reshaping planet. "We came looking for secrets and ended up rewriting the cosmic playbook." "Not quite the legacy I had in mind," Arlen said, her humor as bleak as the landscape below. "That's humanity for you," Mila said with a wry smile. "Always making a mess of things." And as they hurtled away from the chaos, Captain Vesper Arlen couldn't help but think it was only a matter of time before the universe repaid the favor. After all, she mused, fate had a way of landing a punch right when you least expected it. "Buckle up," she said, as the ship shuddered through the atmosphere. "We're in for one hell of a ride." The ship's engines hummed with a sense of urgency as Captain Vesper Arlen tried not to think about the ticking time bombs masquerading as her organs. Outside, Ganymede was becoming something out of a cosmic horror flick, all thanks to a bunch of overly ambitious bacteria. "Well, we've really put our foot in it now," she murmured, hands flying over the controls like a pianist in a death metal band. The ship buckled, and a few more alarms decided to join the cacophony already ringing in their ears. Apparently, Ganymede had opinions about their departure. Thorn, sprawled across a console like an overworked cat, let out a long-suffering sigh. "You'd think landing wasn't punishment enough. Now we get to play host to alien germs." "Guess the universe really likes us, or hates us," Jax offered. He was leaning back, trying to find a comfortable position in a seat designed by someone who clearly thought human spines were entirely optional. Asher Wren, the tech-savvy member of this merry band, was in the corner, watching readouts that looked like something out of a madman's sketchbook. "Hey, if I didn't know better, I'd say this bacteria was designed to do exactly what it's doing." "What, turn us into walking petri dishes?" Thorn asked, raising an eyebrow. "Pretty much," Asher replied. "The stuff's rewriting the biological rulebook and not bothering with an editor." Neera Thorn, the linguist and Thorn's sister, was busy poking at a tablet, her brow furrowed like she was trying to solve a Rubik's Cube that fought back. "You know, if I ever meet the species that made this, I'm giving them a piece of my mind. And maybe a fist." Vesper glanced at her. You might have to stand in line. I'm sure there's an intergalactic queue forming. They all shared a grim smile, the kind that said, "We're screwed," but with a twinkle of gallows humor. It was the only kind of humor they had left. The ship broke through Ganymede's thin atmosphere, the view morphing from desolate ruin to the swirling chaos of Jupiter above. It was beautiful, in the way a storm at sea was beautiful when you were clinging to the wreckage of your boat. "So, any bright ideas?" Vesper asked, her tone as sardonic as ever. "Or are we just going to drift around and hope the bacteria gets bored? Could always try reverse psychology," Jax said. "Tell it we're not interested in terraforming any moons today," Thorne snorted. "Yeah, that's about as likely to work as me landing a date with a supermodel." Before anyone could comment on Thorne's typically high self-esteem, Asher leaned forward, eyes alight with a mix of curiosity and dread. "Nira, what do the symbols mean?" "Anything in there about cures for cosmic-level stupidity?" Nira tapped at her screen, her fingers moving like she was trying to type the winning essay for a Save Humanity competition. "So far, I've got Activate, Transform, and something that looks like it might mean oops." "Great," Vesper said. "So we're working with a language that has a word for oops." The tension eased slightly, a bit of laughter breaking the gloom. It was short-lived, though. The reality of their situation was hard to escape, even with sarcasm. "We've got a problem," Mila announced, her voice slicing through the banter like a laser through butter. "These bacteria aren't just freeloaders. They're, how do I put this delicately? Oh, right, they're bastards." "Wonderful," Jax muttered. "Now we've got rude houseguests on top of everything else," Mila continued, undeterred. "They're consuming our atmosphere, our tech, hell, maybe even our will to live if we give them enough time. Tell me there's a way to stop them," Vesper said, though her tone made it clear she wasn't holding her breath. Not that she'd be in a hurry to breathe right now. "Well," Mila said, drawing the word out like pulling teeth, "we could try to freeze them. But that might involve freezing us too." "Less than ideal unless you're a fan of cryostasis," Asher frowned. "We could try to synthesize a counteragent, but we'd need a lab materials time. You know, all things we're fresh out of, so spontaneous evolution or suicide by bacteria." Thorne summarized, his voice as dry as ever. "Sounds like a win-win, doesn't it?" Jax added, hands folded behind his head. Vesper ran a hand through her hair, feeling like she'd aged a decade in the past Ior. "Look, if we've got alien germs inside us rewriting our DNA, then we've got to assume they are affecting our brains too." "Speaks for itself," Nira said, her smile a weak attempt at levity. "Point is," Vesper continued, "we've got to get this under control before we start seeing the world through bacteria-tinted glasses." Silence stretched between them like a taut wire. The ship's interior felt smaller with each passing second, the walls closing in with the weight of their collective doom. "Okay," Thorne said, finally breaking the silence. "So we fight. And how exactly do you propose we do that?" Mila asked. With harsh language. "Well, it's worked for us so far," Thorne replied with a shrug. Vesper looked around at her crew, the ragtag bunch of misfits and malcontents who had somehow become her responsibility. They were tired, scared, facing insurmountable odds, and they were still ready to fight. "All right," she said, her voice firm. "We're not dead yet, so let's not act like it. Jax, get us in touch with command. Let's see if they've got any bright ideas, or even dim ones at this point." "On it," Jax said, swiveling back to his console. He tapped a few buttons, the ship's comm system crackling to life like an old radio. Nothing but static, the universe's way of telling them to go screw themselves. "Figures," Jax grumbled. "Looks like the bacteria are screwing with our comms too." "Oh, that's just perfect," Nira said, throwing her hands up. "Now we can't even call for help. Guess we're back to Plan B," Vesper said, trying for levity and missing by a mile. "Panic and hope for the best. Panic, us." Asher chuckled, though it was more nervous than amused. "I thought we were immune to that." Vesper stood, the weight of her leadership settling on her shoulders like a leaden cloak. "We'll figure it out. We always do." "Yeah," Thorne said, "right after we screw it up." Asher was back at his console, his fingers a blur as he worked. Might be a long shot, but I'm trying to isolate the bacteria's frequency. If we can identify it, maybe we can jam it. Jamming bacteria frequencies, Jax mused. Now there's a phrase I didn't expect to hear today. Worth a shot, Mila said, adjusting her glasses, which seemed to fog with stress. If these things communicate, maybe we can scramble their signals, or make them angry, Neera added. But hey, what's life without a little risk, like asking a bear to dance, Thorn muttered. If it works, great. If not, well, you're the bear's next meal. Then let's get cracking, Vesper said, taking her seat with renewed determination. We've got a bear to outsmart. Asher worked with a ferocity that would make a caffeine-addled squirrel envious, his fingers flitting across the controls like he was playing an old arcade game, one where losing meant more than just a high score. Got something, he announced after what felt like an eternity. I think I've isolated the frequency. It's weird how? Vesper asked. Weird like, oh, this is interesting, or weird like, oh, we're about to die? A little of both, Asher said. It's like a symphony of static and chaos. Great, Jax said, not missing a beat. The bacteria have a theme song. Neera leaned over Asher's console, peering at the data like it was the most interesting crossword puzzle she'd ever seen. Can we disrupt it? Asher shrugged. Could try sending out a counter signal. But it's a shot in the dark. Hey, shots in the dark are our specialty, Thorn said, his sarcasm as sharp as ever. Vesper nodded. All right, do it. Let's see if we can give these bacteria a headache. Asher programmed the counter signal, his hands a blur once more. There was a moment of tense anticipation, the crew holding their collective breath as the ship's systems hummed in response. Then, silence. For a brief, glorious moment, nothing happened. The ship's alarms dimmed, the air felt less oppressive, and the universe seemed to hold its breath in tandem with the crew. Did it work? Mila whispered, as if speaking too loudly might jinx the whole endeavor. Maybe, Asher said, cautiously optimistic, but I wouldn't start celebrating just yet. Come on, Jax said, grinning. Where's your sense of reckless abandon taking a day off? Asher replied dryly. Vesper exhaled, feeling the tension in her muscles ease, if only slightly. Okay, let's keep monitoring. We might have bought ourselves some time, but we're far from out of the woods, or the moon, Thorn added, or whatever metaphor works here. Just keep your eyes open, Vesper said, feeling the weight of leadership once more. If these bacteria want to play games, we'll play. But we're playing to win. And with that, the crew settled into a tense, watchful silence, aware that their lives, and perhaps the fate of Ganymede, hung in the balance. As the ship cruised through space, Vesper couldn't help but think they were on the verge of something monumental, or monumentally disastrous. But for now, they were alive, and they'd take whatever small victories they could get. The universe might be out to get them, but Vesper Arlen wasn't going down without a fight. And if the bacteria wanted a showdown, then by all means, let the games begin. The ship rattled like a tin can in a washing machine as it cut through the void, each shudder reminding the crew of how precariously their lives dangled. So Jax began, casually flicking a switch that didn't seem to do anything. Any chance this whole bacteria jamming thing doesn't make them mutate into something even worse? Like worse how? Thorn asked, lounging as if he were on a beach rather than in a death trap surrounded by space. Worse like, oh no, they're smarter now, or worse like, oh no, they're throwing a rave in my intestines. Both, Jax replied, grinning like a cat with a sneaky plan up its sleeve. Thorn pondered, stroking his chin with the air of someone who's never been close to solving a problem in his life. I vote for intestines. At least then I can blame my bad dancing on something. Vesper shot them both a look that could have cracked the hull. Focus, children. We're trying to save our skins here, not audition for the comedy circuit. Could have fooled me, Mila muttered, peering at the readings on her screen. Seriously, it's like these bugs are having a party in our atmosphere. They're not just adapting, they're thriving. Great, Asher sighed, eyes glued to his console like he was in hand-to-hand combat with it. Did someone send them an invitation we missed? Maybe RSVP for the apocalypse. Nira was hunched over the alien script again, her brows drawing together in what could only be described as a scowl that had given up trying to be polite. "These symbols aren't helping," she said, stabbing a finger at the screen. "It's like trying to translate a toddler's finger painting." "Yeah, but toddlers don't usually rewrite DNA," Jax pointed out as if that was somehow comforting. "Speak for yourself," Thorn chuckled. "I once ate glue as a kid and I'm pretty sure it changed me forever." "Explains a lot," Nira retorted, not even bothering to look up. Asher's fingers danced over his console as he keyed in a new algorithm. "I'm trying to adjust the frequency to see if we can disrupt their signals again. Maybe break up their little shindig." Vesper nodded. "Good. Let's keep them guessing. If they think our DNA is a dance floor, we need to show them we're the bouncers, or the drunk guy who gets kicked out," Jax mused, because why not? "Look," Vesper said, her voice taking on that leader's edge as she scrutinized her ragtag team. "We've got limited resources, a ship that's barely holding together, and a load of germs that think they are the new landlords. We need a plan." Thorn echoed, feigning shock. "I thought we were just making this up as we went along." "Clearly," Mila added dryly, "because it's working out so well." "All right, how about this?" Vesper said, tapping the console before her with a decisive thump. "Thorn, Mila, work on fortifying the ship systems. Make it as uninviting as possible for these freeloaders. Basically, we're setting up a no-vacancy sign," Mila asked, arching an eyebrow. "Exactly," Vesper replied. "And maybe add a trespassers will be shot clause while you're at it." Thorn smirked, his usual lazy demeanor giving way to a glint of determination. "On it, Captain. We'll make this ship as appealing as a rusty spoon." "Great," Vesper said, turning to the others. "Jax, Asher, keep working on that frequency disruption. If you need to, play them some polka." "That'll scare anyone off. And what about me?" Nira asked, already anticipating the answer. "You," Vesper said with a nod, "keep doing what you're doing. If you can crack that language, we might just find the Rosetta Stone of how to kick these bugs out." Nira sighed, half exasperated, half amused. "Fine. But if I start speaking in tongues, don't say I didn't warn you." The ship continued its journey through space, its brave crew working against the clock as the bacteria continued their insidious work. The air felt thicker somehow, the kind of oppressive that made one's skin itch with the knowing of unseen enemies. "Hey, anyone else notice it's getting a bit tight in here?" Thorn asked, glancing around as if he expected the walls to close in on them. Vesper grimaced. "Yeah, it's not in your head. The air's getting thicker, like we're trying to breathe through soup." "Delicious," Jax murmured, not bothering to hide his sarcasm. "It's the bacteria," Asher said, not looking up from his work. "They're pumping out some kind of byproduct. Makes it feel like we're in a sauna." "A sauna in hell, maybe," Mila retorted, wiping sweat from her forehead. "I didn't sign up for a steam bath." "Focus," Vesper snapped, though her voice softened as she added, "we're not out of options yet." "Asher, any progress on that frequency thing?" "Trying a different angle," Asher said, biting his lip as he adjusted another control. "I've set it to the audio equivalent of nails on a chalkboard. If that doesn't drive them insane, nothing will." "Perfect," Vesper replied with a tight smile. "Let's make those germs regret ever picking a fight with us." Minutes ticked by with all the urgency of a glacier, each second stretching longer than the last. The crew continued their work, each focused on their tasks, their banter dying down as the stakes became more apparent. "Got something," Thorn called out, breaking the silence. "We've managed to reroute power to the filtration systems. It should slow them down." "Well, that's good news," Jax said, a hint of relief creeping into his voice. "At least we won't suffocate." Yet Mila reminded them because optimism was overrated. "Let's not get complacent," Vesper warned. "We've bought ourselves a little time." "Let's use it wisely." "Working on it," Asher muttered, hands flying over his console. "I'm going to try a different frequency. Maybe something a bit more aggressive, like heavy metal aggressive." Jax asked, intrigued. "Or maybe just we mean business aggressive," Asher replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Good, Vesper said, her eyes narrowing with focus. Let's see if we can't scare these freeloaders off our ship. The ship groaned, a mechanical sigh that seemed to echo the crew's weariness. It was a race now, a battle of wills between them and the unseen enemy that threatened to rewrite their very existence. All right, here goes nothing, Asher announced, activating the new frequency. Let's see if we can't give them a little headache. There was a pause, a moment where it felt like the universe itself was holding its breath. Then, a low hum filled the cabin, a sound that was both soothing and menacing, like a lullaby designed to put one to sleep permanently. Anything? Vesper asked, her voice tense with hope and anxiety. Too early to tell, Asher admitted, fingers flying across the controls as he monitored the ship systems. But I've got a good feeling about this one. Not much else to lose, Mila pointed out, adjusting her glasses. And plenty to gain, Jax added, ever the optimist in the face of doom. Keep at it, Vesper said, leaning back in her chair with a sigh. We've got to stay one step ahead of these germs. The hum continued, a background noise that seemed to burrow into their minds, unyielding, relentless. It was both a comfort and a reminder of how precarious their situation was. Hey, I've got something, Neera announced suddenly, her voice a mixture of excitement and disbelief. I think I've found a phrase, something about containment and reset. Reset, Thorn echoed, intrigued. Like hit the big all-cosmic oops button, exactly, Neera replied, eyes shining with a spark of hope. If we can figure out how, maybe we can shut this whole thing down. Well, Jax said, grinning, looks like we might just have an ace up our sleeves after all. Let's not count our space chickens before they hatch, Vesper cautioned, though she couldn't hide the glimmer of hope in her eyes. Neera, keep digging. If there's a way to hit that reset button, we need to find it. On it, Neera said, her focus renewed as she returned to her work. The ship continued to hum, its crew united in their determination to beat the odds. They were outgunned, outmanned, and out of time, but they were human. And if there was one thing humans were good at, it was surviving against all the odds. We're not dead yet, Vesper said, echoing her own rallying cry, as if to remind the universe that they weren't going down without a fight. And we're not going to be. With the crew working tirelessly and the bacteria's party slowly being crashed, hope flickered in the gloom. It was fragile like a candle in a storm, but it was there. Just enough to keep them going, to keep them fighting. And if the bacteria wanted a showdown, they'd picked the wrong ship. Because Vesper Arlen and her crew weren't just going to survive, they were going to win. The ship rattled through the cosmos like a maraca in the hands of a hyperactive toddler. Inside, the atmosphere was less a scene of heroic resilience and more like the morning after a particularly adventurous pub crawl. Captain Vesper Arlen surveyed the crew with a look that suggested she was intently considering the pros and cons of jettisoning them out the airlock. All right, people, less dying, more doing, she barked, her frustration thinly veiled by a veneer of professional detachment. Thorn, currently draped over a console like a lazy cat, raised a finger. Captain, I'd love to help, but I feel like I've been to an all-you-can-eat buffet and the buffet ate back. Mila snorted, barely glancing up from her screen. Thorn, your death would probably help us solve more problems than it would create. You'd miss my charm, Thorn shot back, grinning like a Cheshire cat who just swallowed the canary and the owner's wallet. Can we focus here? Vesper snapped, already regretting her life choices that led her to this ship of irreverent lunatics. Jax, who was rearranging equipment with the kind of cavalier attitude normally reserved for people who didn't know what they were doing, shrugged. Focus is overrated. I hear chaos is the new black, yeah. Well, chaos doesn't keep the doors shut against a universal rewrite, Asher muttered, typing with all the enthusiasm of a man trying to defuse a bomb labeled maybe. Neera, still entrenched in her war against alien hieroglyphs, rolled her eyes. Speaking of rewrites, this damn script is like a bad anti-aging cream, promises miracles, delivers wrinkles. Tell me about it, Jax chimed in, not missing a beat. I tried one of those creams once. My face didn't turn younger, but my wallet sure did. Vesper allowed herself a brief smile despite the circumstances. All right, enough skincare tips. Mila, how's the atmosphere looking? Are we breathing soup yet? Mila squinted at her readings, her expression somewhere between disgust and resignation. Let's just say the bacteria are having a 5-course meal, and we're the main dish. Brilliant, Vesper sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. Just what I always wanted, to be a buffet for microscopic freeloaders. Hey, at least they're not picky eaters, Thorn quipped, earning a smattering of chuckles. But the laughter faded quickly as the reality of their situation reasserted itself. The ship's systems groaned under the strain, and the air had a sticky quality that made every breath feel like a bad decision. Can we not die here? Asher asked, half joking, half serious. That's the plan, Vesper replied, her tone firm. We just need that reset button, Nira. Any luck? Luck doesn't factor into this, Nira grumbled, tapping furiously at her console. But if it did, I'd say yours would be the equivalent of a lottery ticket bought in a different galaxy. Speaking of tickets, Jack said, leaning back in his chair, anyone else feel like we're on a one-way ride to nowhere? Could be worse, Thorn mused. We could be stuck listening to Jax's playlist. Hey, Jax protested, feigning indignation. My taste in music is exquisite. You just lack appreciation. Vesper shook her head, trying to shepherd the conversation back on track. Focus, everyone. We still need to disrupt the bacteria's signals and get out of this mess. Asher fiddled with his controls, his fingers moving at a pace that suggested caffeine had replaced his bloodstream. I'm working on it. If we survive, I'm giving up tech work to become a mime. Whatever floats your existential dread, Mila said dryly, focusing on her screen. The ship lurched suddenly, and everyone grabbed onto whatever was nearest, consoles, chairs, each other, as the vessel protested its treatment with a cacophony of metallic groans. Who's driving this thing? Thorn yelled, half out of his seat. Not the bacteria, I hope, Jack suggested, sounding too cheerful for someone possibly on the brink of death. We've got a power fluctuation, Mila reported, her tone clinical. If this keeps up, the engines might decide they've had enough of our nonsense. Let's not give them any ideas, Vesper said, doing her best to sound in control. Asher, how's that frequency coming? I'd rather not become space debris today. I've got the broadcast running, Asher replied, voice strained. If this doesn't work, I'm switching to interpretive dance, Thorn chuckled. Pretty sure that'll just confuse them into leaving. Or kill us faster, Mila added with a smirk. Vesper rolled her eyes, trying to focus on the task at hand. Nira, any breakthroughs in alien babble? I wish, Nira said, frustration evident in her voice. It's like trying to read a drunk's diary, with all the spelling errors and none of the juicy details. Keep at it, Vesper encouraged. And remember, if anyone needs to vent, scream into the void. It's surprisingly therapeutic. Just as the tension threatened to peak, there was a sudden change in the air, an almost imperceptible shift that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand up. Did anyone else feel that? Mila asked, looking around. Thorn nodded, frowning at his console. Yeah, like we just drove through an invisible speed bump, or like the universe just sneezed, Asher added, still working the controls with the precision of a mad scientist. Whatever it was, let's hope it's in our favor, Vesper said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Or at least not actively trying to kill us, Jax chimed in, ever the optimist. Suddenly, Nira sat up straighter, her eyes wide with something akin to hope. Wait, I think I've got it. Got what? Thorn asked, leaning in as if proximity would somehow grant him omniscience. The reset sequence, Nira replied, her fingers a blur as they tapped commands into her console. It's a long shot, but if we can synchronize it with Asher's frequency, we might just be able to reboot this microbial horror show. Well, what are we waiting for? Mila said, a glint of optimism breaking through the gloom. Let's pull the plug on these little bastards. Vesper nodded, adrenaline sharpening her focus. All right, people, you heard her. Let's crash this party. Asher and Nira worked in tandem. their consoles lighting up like a cheap carnival show as they input the necessary commands. The rest of the crew watched with bated breath, a hopeful tension hanging in the air. "If this works, I'm treating everyone to drinks," Thorne declared, though his tone suggested he was planning more for the apocalypse than celebrations. "Assuming there's anything left to drink," Mila pointed out, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of hope. "Ready?" Asher breathed, his finger hovering over the final command. "On your mark, Captain, do it," Vesper said, her voice carrying the weight of command and the promise of survival. Asher pressed the button, and for a moment the universe seemed to hold its breath. The ship shuddered, the lights flickered, and a low hum resonated through the hull, a sound that was both alien and familiar, like an ancient chant invoking forgotten powers. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then slowly the oppressive weight of the air seemed to lift, and the atmosphere returned to something that didn't immediately threaten asphyxiation. "Did we do it?" Jax asked, almost afraid to believe. Mila checked her readings, her eyes widening. "The bacteria, they're retreating. We actually did it." A collective sigh of relief swept through the crew, followed by the kind of laughter that only came after narrowly avoiding death. "Never doubted us for a second," Thorne lied, leaning back with a satisfied grin. "Of course not," Neera said, rolling her eyes but smiling all the same. "All right, let's not get ahead of ourselves," Vesper cautioned, though her relief was evident. "We're not out of the woods yet, but we've got breathing room." Literally, Asher quipped, finally allowing himself a smile. "Let's just hope our next stop is less microbial," Mila said, glancing at Vesper. "Got any ideas anywhere but here sounds good to me," Vesper replied, feeling the weight of command lighten just a fraction. As the ship continued its journey through the stars, the crew settled into a more relaxed rhythm, the specter of imminent doom now a little less threatening. "Hey, Captain," Thorne called, a mischievous glint in his eye. "About those drinks," Vesper laughed, a genuine hearty laugh that felt like a balm to her weary soul. "Sure, Thorne. First round's on me, assuming we find a bar out here." And with that, the ship sailed on, a tiny, defiant speck in the vastness of space, carrying with it the indomitable spirit of humanity, a refusal to surrender, a knack for survival, and an unwavering belief that somewhere, somehow, there was always hope. The ship roared through the infinite blackness of space with all the grace of a brick wrapped in tinfoil. Captain Vesper Arlen sat in the command chair, her eyes glued to the flickering screens that lined the console. It was like watching a 3D movie in a 2D theater, only with more potential for catastrophic failure. "We're down to the last of the power reserves," Mila announced, her voice carrying the resigned tone of someone who'd accepted that the universe was out to screw them. "If we don't find a way to stabilize the system, we might as well start knitting sweaters out of our own hair. At least then we'll be warm when everything else stops working." "Great," Thorne said, his feet propped up on the console as if lounging in the face of oblivion was somehow productive. "I've always wanted to die in a metal coffin. It really completes my screwed by the cosmos aesthetic." Vesper rubbed her temples, trying to massage some sense into the situation. "We've got to keep the engines running, or we're just another cosmic speed bump for some space whale." Asher, still glued to his screen, was frantically typing away, his fingers a blur. "I'm on it. But I'll tell you, if this ship were any older, we'd be trying to fix it with duct tape and a prayer." "Well, maybe if we all prayed hard enough, the engines would actually start listening," Jax said, his head buried in a mess of wires. "Or at least send us a refund for this death trap." Neera, who had been silent for a while, finally looked up from her console. "I'm still trying to make sense of these alien hieroglyphs. I'd have better luck trying to teach a cat calculus." "Wouldn't count on it," Asher muttered. "Cats are smarter than this bucket of bolts." Captain Vesper's patience was already stretched thinner than spaced-out taffy. "All I need is for one thing to not go catastrophically wrong today. Can anyone manage that?" Mila gave a grim smile that was more a baring of teeth. "Sure, Captain. I'll just tell the universe to put a pin in its plans to kill us." As if on cue, the ship groaned, metal twisting like it had ambitions to join a symphony orchestra of tortured souls. The lights flickered ominously, each flick off feeling like a countdown to the inevitable. "Sounds like the universe didn't get the memo," Thorne said, grinning despite the circumstances. "Or it did and it just doesn't give a damn." The crew was getting good at laughing in the face of doom. It was either that or cry, and tears didn't do much for morale or functionality aboard a ship that seemed intent on self-destruction. "So," Jax said, emerging from his wired jungle with a look of mock triumph, "what's the plan? Or is the plan to plan?" Vesper shot him a look that could have melted tungsten. "The plan is to not become cosmic fertilizer. Asher, any progress?" Asher's fingers were practically smoking. "I'm rerouting auxiliary power to the engines. It's a bit like trying to jumpstart a star with a potato battery, but it's something." "And what about the bacteria?" Nira asked, still grappling with the alien script. "Any chance they'll just decide they've had enough of our company and leave? Considering they've redefined hospitality to include hostile takeover, I'd say that's a solid no," Mila replied, deadpan. Vesper stood and paced the limited space. "We need a way to push them back, keep them from turning us into a ghost ship." "Why don't we just ask them nicely?" Thorne suggested, clearly relishing the absurdity. "Maybe they'll be charmed by our sparkling personalities." The ship lurched again, and for a moment gravity seemed to forget its job. Everyone reached for something solid, a reflex they'd all developed over too many near-death experiences. "Okay, let's assume charming them isn't on the table," Jax said, once they were right side up again. "What's plan B?" Vesper turned to Asher. "What's the status on that frequency thing you were working on? Can we use it to jam the bacteria long enough to stabilize the ship?" Asher shrugged, looking as hopeful as a man stranded on an island with only coconuts for company. "It's a long shot, but if I can amplify it through the ship systems, we might get a few minutes of peace." Nira raised an eyebrow. "And if it fails? Then we get to die knowing we tried our best," Mila said, still glued to her screens, ever the pessimist with a hint of optimism. "Or at least our least worst." "Fantastic," Vesper muttered, tapping into reserves of determination she didn't remember signing up for. "All right, let's do this. We'll take whatever chance we can get." The crew, a motley band of misfits and survivors, fell into a tense silence, each member focused on their task as if their lives depended on it. Because, well, they did. "Ready," Asher said, fingers poised over the controls like a pianist about to launch into a sonata of doom. "Just say the word, Captain." Vesper took a deep breath, feeling the weight of command settle on her shoulders like a particularly unflattering coat. "Do it." The moment Asher activated the frequency jammer, the ship shuddered violently, as if rejecting the very notion of survival. Lights flickered, consoles beeped angry protests, and the air felt charged with static. "Hold on," Vesper shouted, grabbing onto the nearest console as the ship pitched and rolled through the void. The frequency pulsed through the ship, an invisible wave that swept through the systems, disrupting the bacterial invasion with a forceful shove. For a brief, beautiful second, everything was quiet. "Did it work?" Jax asked, voice tinged with disbelief. Mila checked the readings, her face a mix of surprise and cautious optimism. "The bacteria are retreating. We've actually got a shot at this." "Feels like we just won the lottery of least likely outcomes," Thorne quipped, his smile wide enough to rival a Cheshire cat's. "Don't celebrate just yet," Vesper cautioned, though she couldn't suppress a grin. "We need to stabilize the engines and get to a safe zone before the bacteria have a chance to regroup." Nira nodded, refocusing on the alien script. "I'll keep working on the hieroglyphs. Maybe there's something in here that can help us understand what we're dealing with." "Good," Vesper said, her resolve renewed. "And Asher, keep that frequency going. We need all the time we can get." Asher looked up, his expression one of weary confidence. "Captain, if we survive this, I'm buying us all drinks. Assuming there's a bar still standing when we're done," Jax added with a chuckle. Vesper glanced around at her crew, the people who had somehow become her family in this metal coffin hurtling through space. They were a ragtag bunch, but they were hers, and she'd be damned if she let some cosmic bacteria take that away. "All right, people," she said, her voice firm and clear. "Let's show the universe that humanity may not be perfect, but we sure as hell aren't quitters." With renewed determination, the crew set to work, each member playing their part in a desperate dance of survival. They were flying on the edge of chaos, navigating a universe that seemed hell-bent on their destruction. But for the first time in a long while, hope wasn't just a distant concept. It was something tangible, something real. And as the ship sailed on through the endless night, one thing was certain: they weren't done yet. Not by a long shot. The ship continued its grim crawl through the abyss, an obstinate old hunk of metal refusing to die, much like its crew. Captain Vesper Arlen leaned back in her command chair, a cracked leather throne that rocked with each shudder of the ship. Her eyes strayed to the flickering console, a jittery surrogate for hope. "Let's keep this jalopy together a bit longer, folks. I'd like to not become a cautionary tale." "Yeah, I hear space funerals are a real downer," Jax murmured from beneath a nest of tangled wires. "All that floating debris ruining someone's perfectly good day." "Smells like optimism," Thorne quipped, flashing a grin as he poked at the console with a spanner, like a caveman offered a smartphone. Vesper's patience was wearing thinner than the oxygen reserves. "If you've finished your stand-up routine, how about we focus on not joining the space debris? Hey, maybe the cosmic bacteria will find us too unappetizing," Mila suggested, because gallows humor was the ship's unofficial currency. Asher, who seemed fused to his screen at this point, let out a frustrated breath. "If they have any sense of taste, they will." Nira, meanwhile, was hunched over her console like a scholar deciphering an ancient curse. "These hieroglyphs are the gift that keeps on mocking. I swear it's like trying to solve a crossword with no vowels." "Don't sweat it, sis," Thorne said. "At least your efforts are failing in style." Vesper rubbed her temples, wondering if her crew's sarcasm could somehow be weaponized. "Let's keep the focus on finding solutions, not sharpening our wit. Any idea what these hieroglyphs actually say, Nira?" Nira sighed, pushing her hair back with a grease-streaked hand. "Something about terraforming and reversing it, I think. Alien linguistics aren't exactly my forte, but it sounds like there might be an artifact somewhere that can undo the bacteria's effects." "An antidote?" Mila asked, her voice tinged with a hope so thin it was practically transparent. "Possibly," Nira admitted with a shrug. "Or it could just be instructions on how to bake space muffins." "Your guess is as good as mine." "Great, so we're following a cosmic treasure map to a bakery." "Perfect," Thorne said. "What could possibly go wrong?" "Everything, but that's never stopped us before," Vesper said, determination hardening in her voice. "If there's even a chance this artifact can help, we need to find it." The ship moaned again, a long, drawn-out creak that felt like a complaint voiced by an ancient deity. Vesper slapped the console as if a good thwack could enforce compliance. "Stay together, you bucket of bolts." Asher leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "And here I thought my biggest problem today would be my caffeine withdrawal. Nothing like impending doom to put your priorities into perspective," Jax said, sorting through wires with the forlorn demeanor of a man searching for a missing sock. Vesper stood, her presence filling the cramped bridge. "All right, let's get on this search. Nira, can you at least point us in the right direction?" Nira tapped a sequence into her console, the alien script dancing across the screen like an elaborate puzzle made by someone who despised sense. "I think I've got a decent lead. Something about an artifact buried within one of Ganymede's underground cities." "Ganymede's like a bad ex," Thorne said. "Just when you think you're free, it pulls you back in. Only this time, we're not going to let it screw us," Vesper declared, her eyes steely with resolve. "We're heading back to Ganymede." The crew exchanged glances, their collective sense of humor momentarily eclipsed by the reality of returning to the bacteria-infested moon. But they nodded, determination mingling with the gallows humor that had become their lifeline. "Let's do it," Mila said, her voice gruff yet confident. "I've always wanted to return to a place that nearly killed me." The engines groaned in reluctant agreement as the ship adjusted course, a metallic groan echoing its crew's sentiments. "Ganymede or bust," Jack said, plugging a final wire into place. "Let's hope it's not the latter." As the ship hurtled toward the moon, the crew fell into a tense silence, each member retreating into their own thoughts. Vesper stared at the silhouette of Ganymede on the view screen, a mottled orb that seemed to pulse with menace. "Ganymede," she murmured. "Round 2. The ship began its descent, shuddering like a cat being forced into the bathtub. The atmosphere of Ganymede enveloped them, a suffocating blanket of microbial hostility. Vesper gripped the armrests of her chair, willing the ship to hold together. "Brace for impact," Asher warned, his fingers flying over the controls as he fought to keep the ship from disintegrating. They touched down with a thud that felt like it reverberated through their bones. The console beeped angrily, protesting the rough treatment. "We good?" Vesper asked, scanning the bridge. "As good as we're gonna be," Jax replied, shaking out his limbs like a boxer preparing for a fight. "I'll check the engines again." "Right. Let's move," Vesper ordered, her voice cutting through the haze of tension. "We need to find that artifact and get the hell out of here." The crew disembarked, stepping onto the surface of Ganymede with the caution of mice entering a cat's lair. The landscape was a desolate alien ruin, an architectural graveyard shrouded in a haze that whispered of forgotten civilizations and microbial menace. "I love what they've done with the place," Thorne muttered, kicking a rock that skittered across the cracked ground. "Focus," Vesper said, leading the way through the ruins. Her eyes scanned the alien hieroglyphs carved into the stone, her heart pounding with the urgency of their mission. "Nira, you're up. Where's this artifact supposed to be?" Nira consulted her tablet, frowning as she tried to make sense of the alien script. "There's a network of tunnels beneath us. The artifact should be in the central chamber, assuming it hasn't been turned into bacteria food." "Charming," Mila said, hefting a metal rod that promised a good whack if anything tried to eat them on the way. "Let's hope our luck holds." The crew descended into the tunnels, the darkness pressing in around them like an unwelcome guest. Their flashlights cut through the gloom, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. The air was thick with the scent of decay, a reminder of the danger lurking just out of sight. "Anyone else feel like they are in a haunted house?" Jax asked, his voice echoing off the walls. "Yeah, only this haunted house comes with bonus alien bacteria," Asher replied, his fingers twitching nervously on his flashlight. They moved cautiously deeper into the labyrinth, the tension palpable as they navigated the twisting pathways. Vesper led the way, her instincts honed by years of surviving against impossible odds. "This must be it," Nira said, pointing to a large chamber ahead. The central chamber. They entered the chamber, their flashlights illuminating the artifact at its center. It was an ancient, monolithic structure, covered in hieroglyphs that glowed faintly in the darkness. The air around it hummed with potential, a presence that felt both ominous and awe-inspiring. "Well, if that's not the mother of all paperweights, I don't know what is," Thorne said, his voice hushed with a mix of awe and disbelief. "Let's just hope it does more than hold down loose papers," Vesper replied, stepping forward to examine the artifact. "Nira, see if you can decode these symbols. We need to know how to activate it." Nira nodded, her fingers tracing the hieroglyphs as she tried to make sense of their meaning. "It's like trying to read a recipe written by a drunk chef." "Let's hope they weren't too drunk to include the important parts," Asher said, glancing nervously at the artifact. The crew waited in tense silence as Nira worked, the chamber filled with the soft hum of the artifact and the distant echo of their collective breathing. It was a moment suspended in time, the weight of their mission balanced on the knife edge of uncertainty. At last Nira looked up, her eyes alight with discovery. "I think I've got it. These symbols, they are instructions for reversing the bacteria's effects. We might actually be able to use this thing." Vesper allowed herself a flicker of hope, a dangerous thing to entertain in their line of work. but it was there, a spark in the darkness. All right, let's activate it. Carefully, Nira carefully followed the instructions, her fingers dancing over the symbols in a calculated sequence. The artifact responded with a low hum, the hieroglyphs glowing brighter as it came to life. "Here goes nothing," Jax murmured, his eyes fixed on the artifact as it began to pulse with energy. The air in the chamber vibrated with power, a tangible force that seemed to breathe life into the ancient structure. The artifact emitted a soft, melodic tone, a sound that resonated deep within the crew's very bones. "It's working," Asher said, his voice barely audible over the hum. "The bacteria, they are retreating." A collective sigh of relief rippled through the crew, the tension that had gripped them easing as the artifact did its work. For the first time since their ordeal began, there was a glimpse of a future not shadowed by death. "Looks like we might actually survive this after all," Thorne said, a wry smile playing on his lips. "The universe hasn't quite got us beat yet." Vesper allowed herself a smile, a rare expression that spoke volumes. "No, it hasn't, but let's not get too comfortable. We still need to stabilize the ship and get off this rock." The crew moved quickly, securing the artifact and making their way back through the tunnels. The dark corridors that had seemed so foreboding now felt like a path to salvation, each step bringing them closer to escape. They emerged into the daylight, the ruins of Ganymede casting long shadows across their path. The ship stood waiting, a battered silhouette against the alien landscape, but to the crew's eyes, it was the embodiment of hope. "Let's get back to it," Vesper said, her voice filled with determination. "We've got a future to save, and I'd like to be around to see it." As they boarded the ship, the engines roared to life, a sound that was music to their ears. The ship lifted off, leaving the haunted moon behind, and the crew settled in for the journey ahead. "Next stop anywhere but here," Thorne said, his voice buoyed by a newfound sense of freedom. Vesper took her place at the helm, a smile of quiet triumph on her lips. The future was uncertain, but for now they were alive, and that was more than enough. "All right, team," she said, glancing around at the faces of her crew, her family. "Let's see just how far we can go." As the ship soared into the void, a ragtag band of survivors defying the odds, one thing was certain: wherever they were headed, they were going there together. The air inside the ship hummed with a low, vibrating tension as the crew gathered around the artifact, now carefully placed in the cramped control room. It was like hosting a dinner party with a guest list that included both a life-saving miracle and a ticking time bomb. Vesper rubbed the back of her neck, glancing at her crew, her motley family. If they were going to pull this off, it would be by the skin of their teeth. "All right, folks," Vesper started, her voice clear but laced with a humorless chuckle. "We've got an ancient alien artifact brimming with enough power to turn Ganymede from a bacterial nightmare into a quaint vacation spot. But first, we need to figure out how to use it without blowing ourselves into the next galaxy." Thorne leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "No pressure, right? I mean, if we mess up, at least we won't be around to face the consequences." "Optimism, that's the spirit," Mila said dryly, rolling her eyes. "I'd raise a toast to our inevitable demise, but we're fresh out of booze." "Let's not get too carried away with the doom and gloom," Jax said, crouched by the console with a collection of wires that looked like a bowl of spaghetti designed by a sadist. "I've jury-rigged the power systems to give us a bit more juice. Should keep this Christmas ornament from shorting out the ship." Nira looked up from her notes, lines of alien script now etched into her brain like a tattoo she hadn't asked for. "I can start the sequence, but once it's activated, we'll have to guide the energy. Think of it as riding a bull made of lightning." "Sounds like a shockingly good time," Thorne shot back, earning a groan from Asher. "Let's crack this thing open," Vesper said, taking a seat in her command chair that groaned under the weight of its own age. She flicked the switch, bringing the console to life with a flicker of angry red lights. "Nira, you take point. Everyone else be ready to jump in. We're going to need every hand on deck." Nira took a deep breath, steadying herself as her fingers danced over the alien symbols. The artifact began to hum, a low, melodic drone that echoed through the ship like the world's most ominous lullaby. The hieroglyphs on its surface pulsed with a rhythm that seemed almost alive, a heartbeat waiting to sync with the universe. "Here we go," Nira muttered, her voice barely a whisper over the growing hum. Aligning the energy vectors. As the artifact powered up, the ship's lights dimmed, flickering like a candle in a hurricane. Asher was hunched over the control panel, teeth gritted. "We're pulling a lot of power." "Jax, you better pray those wires hold. If they don't, we'll have a lovely view of our own explosion," Jax replied, tapping the console nervously. The artifact's hum grew louder, filling the room with a sound that was at once unsettling and oddly comforting. It was the sound of possibility, a reminder that the universe was bigger and stranger than any of them could comprehend. But if they could harness it, maybe they could survive this hellish ordeal. "Energy levels stabilizing," Nira reported, her voice calm and steady. "We're at the point of no return." "Good. Now let's see if we can steer this thing without getting fried," Vesper said, leaning forward in her chair. Mila and Thorn exchanged a glance, ready to jump in at a moment's notice. "Feels like we're juggling thermal detonators here," Mila quipped, her dry humor an anchor in the storm of tension. The artifact flared, its glow intensifying until the chamber was bathed in a ghostly light. All around, the ship shuddered as if sharing in a collective shiver of anticipation. The alien power coursed through the systems, seeking control. "Redirecting flow through the primary conduits," Asher announced, his fingers flying over the controls with the precision of a maestro conducting a symphony. "Vesper, I need you to adjust the energy intake manually." "On it," Vesper replied, her hands moving with the instinct born of years spent wrestling with faulty machinery. She twisted knobs and flipped switches, guiding the energy like a conductor leading an orchestra on the brink of chaos. The artifact's hum intensified, a crescendo that sent shivers down their spines. Nira's gaze was fixed on the hieroglyphs, her concentration absolute. Almost there, the room seemed to hold its breath, each second stretching into eternity. Outside, the distant surface of Ganymede waited, a testament to their success or failure. "No pressure. Energy stabilized," Asher confirmed, his voice tinged with disbelief. "I can't believe it's actually working." "Believe it," Vesper said, her voice carrying a confidence that belied her own racing heart. "We've got this." Thorn let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "I'd say we deserve a medal, but I'd settle for not dying." The artifact pulsed with a rhythmic glow, a beacon of hope in the darkness. The bacteria on Ganymede, the very stuff of nightmares, began to retreat, their relentless assault on the moon's ecology halted by the ancient power now coursing through the ship. "We did it," Nira said, her voice a mix of awe and exhaustion. The bacteria's retreating. The crew erupted into a cacophony of relieved laughter and cheers, the weight of their ordeal lifting like a fog burned away by the sun. It was a victory, hard-won and savored in the face of overwhelming odds. "Time to get the hell out of here," Vesper said, her resolve undiminished by their success. "We've got a ship to stabilize and a future to find." The crew sprang into action, their movements a symphony of efficiency as they worked to secure the artifact and power down the systems. Each step was a reminder of their resilience, their ability to adapt and overcome in the face of adversity. As they prepared to leave, the artifact's glow dimmed, its work complete but its presence a constant reminder of the mysteries that still lay beyond the stars. "All right, let's wrap this up," Jax said, disconnecting the last of the power lines with a flourish. "I'd say we've overstayed our welcome." "Couldn't agree more," Mila replied, shouldering her metal rod with a grin. "I think we've tempted fate long enough for one day." Vesper led the way back to the bridge, her heart light with the thrill of victory. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, a testament to the strength of their bonds and the power of hope. "Next stop, anywhere but here," Thorn said, echoing his earlier sentiment with a renewed sense of purpose. The ship's engines roared to life, a sound that spoke of freedom and the promise of new horizons. As they lifted off from the surface of Ganymede, leaving the haunted moon behind, the crew settled in for the journey ahead. "Here's to the next adventure," Vesper said, her voice carrying the weight of their triumph and the hope of a brighter future. And as the ship soared into the void, a ragtag band of survivors defying the odds, one thing was certain. Wherever they were headed, they were going there together, with humor in their hearts and a fierce determination to face whatever the universe dared to throw their way. The artifact, now secured and dormant, was a reminder of what they had achieved and what they could achieve again. It was a symbol of their resilience, their ingenuity, and the power of human will. As the stars stretched out before them, a vast canvas of possibility, the crew of the ship knew that the future was theirs to shape. And with their humor intact and their bonds unbreakable, they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. "Let's see just how far we can go," Vesper said, her voice a quiet promise that resonated through the ship and into the depths of space. And with that, they embarked on a new journey, a testament to the enduring spirit of humanity and the unyielding power of hope in the face of the unknown. The hum of the ship's engines was like the constant drone of a tired old man complaining about his bad knees. It was a miracle the ancient hunk of junk didn't fall apart every time they fired it up. As they drifted away from Ganymede's orbit, Captain Vesper Arlen sank back into her command chair, the cracked leather creaking under her weight like it shared her exhaustion. The artifact had done its job, and the cosmic bacteria were retreating like a bunch of delinquent teenagers caught spray painting the moon. Vesper glanced around at her crew, her eyes lingering on each battered face. "Well, I'd say we've survived another day without turning into alien snot," she said, managing a wry grin. "Cheers to that, eh?" Thorn, leaning nonchalantly against the bulkhead, smirked. "I'd toast, but I'm fresh out of anything worth drinking. Plus, I'm not sure swallowing anything on this ship is a good idea." "Might end up with tentacles, or a third eye," Asher chimed in, still hunched over the console. "You know, for better depth perception." "Always the optimist, Asher," Mila said, adjusting her seat with a metallic screech that made everyone wince. "But hey, at least we'll be able to see death coming from an extra angle." Neera sat cross-legged on the floor, exhausted but still clutching her notes like they held the secrets of the universe. "We made it," she murmured, her voice carrying a hint of disbelief. "I didn't think deciphering ancient alien hieroglyphs would be the least dangerous part of my day." Jax chuckled, unplugging a mass of wires with a flourish that suggested he might know what he was doing. "The way I see it, we've cheated death enough times to start charging it rent. Ganymede's not our problem anymore." Vesper sighed, her gaze fixed on the view outside the viewport. The moon was shrinking behind them, a distant orb that now seemed more myth than reality. A real fixer-upper, that place. "Maybe next time we'll vacation somewhere with less homicidal bacteria, or at least a beach," Mila added. "I could use some sunbathing, or a sunburn." At this point, I'm not picky. The crew's laughter was a balm, easing the tension that had hung over them like a storm cloud. They'd survived against the odds, but the experience had left its scars. Each of them was changed, their perspectives shifted by the brush with death and the alien mysteries they'd unearthed. "So, what's the philosophical takeaway here?" Thorn asked, tapping his fingers on the bulkhead. "We're insignificant specks in a vast universe, but we're pretty good at not dying." "Sounds about right," Vesper replied. "But maybe it's more like, we're insignificant specks who can seriously mess up anything we touch, even when we're trying to help." Neera shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "I think it's more about resilience. We face the unknown not because we want to, but because we have to. And sometimes we actually make it out alive." "That's one way to spin it," Asher said, stretching his arms with a groan. "I'd say we're just stubborn bastards who refuse to give up." "Stubbornness does seem to be a common trait," Jax agreed, his hands now fiddling with a loose panel. "It's that or stupidity. I'm not sure which, probably both," Mila offered, her grin as dry as Ganymede's bacterial desserts. But hey, we're still here, aren't we? Vesper nodded, feeling the weight of their shared experience settle into her bones like an old friend. They'd faced the abyss and come out the other side, scarred but alive. And as they drifted further from Ganymede, the reality of their accomplishment began to sink in. "We've got a chance now," she said, her voice steady and filled with a quiet determination. "A chance to keep going, to find a place where we can be more than just survivors. That's the dream, isn't it?" Thorne said, his tone softening. "A place where we're not always looking over our shoulders for the next disaster." "Utopian," Mila said, the word a touch bitter on her tongue. "But dreams are what keep us moving forward." Vesper's mind drifted back to the artifact, now safely secured and dormant. It was a symbol of their victory, a testament to their ingenuity and the power of human will. But it was also a reminder of the vast unknown that loomed beyond their small corner of the galaxy. "We've got what it takes," Vesper said, a hint of pride in her voice. "We've proved that much." And then some, Neera agreed, rising to her feet with a grace that belied her exhaustion. "But let's not get too comfortable. We've got a long way to go." As they settled back into their routines, the ship hummed around them, a familiar cocoon of metal and machinery. The future was uncertain, but there was comfort in the knowledge that they'd face it together. They were a family, forged in the fires of adversity, bound by a shared resolve to carve out their place in the universe. "Next destination?" Jax asked, glancing over his shoulder at Vesper. "Wherever the stars take us," she replied, her eyes fixed on the infinite expanse beyond the viewport. "Anywhere but here." The ship's engines roared, a defiant cry against the silence of space. As they accelerated into the unknown, a sense of anticipation filled the cabin, a promise of new adventures and the chance to shape their own destinies. With that, the crew of the battered old ship embarked on their next journey, a testament to the indomitable spirit of humanity and the unyielding hope that drove them ever onwards. They'd faced the darkness and emerged victorious, a ragtag band of survivors ready to take on whatever the universe dared to throw their way. And as they soared into the void, the stars stretched out before them, a vast canvas of possibility waiting to be explored. With humor in their hearts and a fierce determination to face the unknown, they were ready for whatever lay ahead.